There's a war happening right now, not one fought with missiles or soldiers, but with power, money, and global influence. And in this silent war between the United States and China, Beijing has just unleashed its ultimate weapon, Africa. At first glance, that might sound strange. After all, Africa is often called the least developed region in the world, but beneath its deserts, jungles, and cities lies something far greater, the future. Because according to analysts and economists around the world, Africa is where the fourth industrial revolution will truly begin. That's why the world's biggest powers are rushing in what many now call the second scramble for Africa. It's not about colonizing land this time, it's about colonizing opportunity. And while Western nations debate and delay, China is already building roads, ports, power grids, and alliances. Step by step, deal by deal, Africa is becoming the front line in the new global war for dominance. So the question is, how exactly is China doing it? And where does Africa stand in this modern-day battlefield of empires? Let's find out. It's the mid-1960s. Zambia has just gained its independence, a young nation full of promise, rich in copper, and ready to build its future. But President Kenneth Kaunda is facing a storm, a crisis not of his making, but one that could destroy everything his people have fought for. Zambia is landlocked, surrounded by bigger, stronger neighbors. Its lifeline, the copper mines of the Copper Belt, power the nation's economy. But there's one problem. To sell that copper to the world, Zambia needs to move it through railways and ports, owned and controlled by countries that do not wish it well. To the south, Rhodesia, today's Zimbabwe, and further down, apartheid South Africa, both run by white minority governments, both openly hostile to the new wave of African independence sweeping the continent. And Kenneth Kaunda knew the truth. If these neighbors decided to close their borders, Zambia would be strangled overnight. No exports, no imports, no fuel, no future. But the question is, why were they so determined to isolate Zambia? What was it about this small, newly free country that terrified its white-ruled neighbors so much? The hostility wasn't a mystery. It all boiled down to Zambia's courage and its choices. Since gaining independence in 1964, President Kenneth Kaunda had done something extraordinary. He turned his young nation into a safe haven for freedom fighters across Africa. From Zimbabwe's ZANU and ZAPU to South Africa's African National Congress, Zambia became their home in exile, a command center for guerrilla movements fighting colonial and apartheid regimes. But such bravery came at a cost. By standing with the oppressed, Kaunda made enemies of the powerful, and those white-led governments in Rhodesia and South Africa were furious. To them, Zambia wasn't a neighbor anymore. It was a threat. They tightened their grip. They shut down trade routes. They made sure Zambia felt the noose of isolation tightening with every shipment delayed, every train halted, every port closed. President Kaunda was cornered. His country's economy was bleeding. But instead of bowing to pressure, he reached out to another leader who shared his dream of African freedom, Julius Nyerere of Tanzania. Both men were Pan-Africanists at heart, idealists who believed that unity, not dependency, was the key to Africa's survival. Together, they revived a forgotten 19th century dream, first imagined by Cecil Rhodes, the British imperialist who once wanted to connect Cape Town to Cairo by rail. But Kaunda and Nyerere had a different vision. This time, the railway wouldn't serve empire. It would liberate Africa from it. A single line of steel stretching from Zambia's copper belt to the Tanzanian port of Dar es Salaam, a new lifeline for a landlocked nation, a symbol of independence that no border could block, and thereby bypass Zimbabwe and South Africa entirely. In the hands of Kaunda and Nyerere, the railway would become not a tool of empire, but a conduit of emancipation. But there was a problem. As young countries, neither of them could fund the project. So, they turned to the West for help. They begged France, Britain, the World Bank, and the United States to lend financial support. But guess what? All of these countries and institutions said no. Why? It wasn't because they didn't have the money. No, it was because they wanted Africa to remain under the control and influence of the West. It was at this point the two Pan-African leaders decided to look for an alternative. Instead of continuously begging the West, they turned east. In Beijing, They found a willing partner in Chairman Mao Zedong. China agreed to fund, build, and deliver the entire railway, and with remarkably few strings attached. In one of the most ambitious foreign aid efforts of the 20th century, Chinese engineers and workers descended upon Africa in their thousands. In total, more than 100,000 people, Chinese, Tanzanians, and Zambians, worked on the railway. Upon its completion in 1975, the Tanzara railway line spanned nearly 1,900 kilometers. The total value of the project, when adjusted for inflation, is estimated at over $3 billion, making it the largest foreign aid project in Chinese history at the time. But the Tanzara was more than just a railway. Known as the Uhuru, or Freedom Railway in Tanzania, it stood as a powerful symbol, a living monument embodying the solidarity between post-colonial Africa and revolutionary China. But beyond this, it sent a message to the rest of the African liberation leaders, including future presidents of Zimbabwe, Namibia, Mozambique, and South Africa. The message was clear: if the West won't help us, we will build our future elsewhere. We can always turn to China. Now, while in the years following, the West somehow managed to become Africa's largest partner, this message stuck in the minds of African leaders. This is why whenever there seems to be no way for African countries to get help from the West, they turn to China. China realized this and decided to capitalize on it to spread its influence slowly but gradually. For decades, China has methodically cultivated relationships with African leaders. Over the last 35 years, every Chinese foreign minister has continued an unbroken annual tradition of making Africa the first destination of their overseas travels. This is a symbolic act that reflects long-term strategic prioritization on the part of China. It's quite different from that of the West that only thinks short-term. For instance, the Chinese president, Xi Jinping, has visited 8 African countries since assuming power in 2012, averaging a trip every 2 years. This is far greater than that of any US president in recent memory. In 2000, under President Jiang Zemin, China institutionalized its Africa strategy with the launch of the Forum on China-Africa Cooperation, FOCAC. The Triennial Summit, rotating between Beijing and African capitals, brings together leaders from across the continent for high-level meetings with top Chinese officials. In contrast, high-level engagement in Africa by American officials has been largely symbolic in recent years. There has only been one US presidential visit to Africa since the COVID-19 pandemic, and this was by President Biden in December 2024, only a few weeks before he was to hand over power to the incoming Trump administration. Before this, the last sitting US president to visit Africa was Barack Obama, almost a decade ago. Under the Obama administration, the US attempted to start its own version of FOCAC in the US-Africa Summit of 2014. The summit was scrapped entirely under Donald Trump's first term. It was only revived in late 2022 when the Biden administration, significantly weakened by midterm electoral losses, attempted to re-engage. Now, this is where it gets even more interesting. Unlike the China-Africa Summit, where President Xi Jinping and his top ministers meet individually with each African head of state, showing that they respect Africa, the US summit was marked by uneven access. The US summit was marked by uneven access. President Biden only met with African leaders as a group, and bilateral exchanges were limited to a few meetings held by Secretary of State Antony Blinken with a select number of African leaders. But this is not just limited to the US. This pattern is exactly how every Western country has organized summits with Africa, and it goes to show how little they respect the continent and are only concerned at what they can extract from the continent. If you can recall, Trump did the same thing a few months ago, where he met with only 5 African presidents, including the president of Senegal and Liberia. Anyone who watched that meeting could tell that it wasn't based on mutual partnership. Trump was clearly lording it and showing superiority over the most African leaders. And the African leaders themselves made it worse with their subversive attitude. One of them, the president of Liberia, even addressed Trump as "Sir," despite the fact that he too is a president of a country. Now, During the 2022 US-Africa Summit, Washington made several headline-grabbing pledges, including support for the African Union's G20 membership, backing a permanent African seat on the UN Security Council, and a $55 billion commitment to the AU's 2063 development agenda. But guess what? The most important issues raised by African leaders were ignored. Notably, the summit sidestepped the growing debt burden many African nations face from Washington-based institutions like the World Bank and IMF. It also avoided the long-standing concern of unfair global commodity pricing, a system that continues to disadvantage African producers at the bottom of the value chain. But the worst part is that till today, not one of those pledges have been fulfilled by the US. This is why in recent times, African leaders themselves are increasingly turning to China despite the fact that there is an increasing criticism of China's lending practices. For many African governments, the difference is clear. While both Washington and Beijing are creditors, only one appears consistently willing to invest in infrastructure, meet heads of state bilaterally, and maintain long-term strategic interest. Meanwhile, the U.S. relationship with its largest African trade partner, South Africa, has deteriorated sharply. In March 2025, the Trump administration expelled South Africa's ambassador in Washington and began boycotting G20 meetings hosted under South Africa's chairmanship. Simultaneously, trade relations have soured. The U.S. has imposed tariffs on exports from some of Africa's least developed economies, such as Lesotho and Madagascar, key beneficiaries of the African Growth and Opportunity Act, which once served as a lifeline for economic growth through duty-free access to U.S. markets. As the U.S. retreats diplomatically, with recent reports suggesting an imminent closure of several Africa-based U.S. embassies, Beijing is doubling down. Trade between Africa and China now far surpasses that between Africa and the U.S., cementing Beijing's position as the continent's top economic partner. And while the future of U.S. engagement remains uncertain under a second Trump presidency, China's strategy continues to emphasize continuity, state-to-state relationships, and a non-interventionist posture. This has helped to not just spread China's influence, but also position China for the incoming fourth revolution. You see, as we mentioned at the beginning of this video, there is currently a second scramble for Africa, and it's all because of the continent's vast resources and manpower. According to the Atlantic Council, Africa holds around 30% of the world's mineral reserves, including critical resources like cobalt, gold, and platinum, along with 12% of global oil and 8% of natural gas reserves, making it essential for global industries such as electronics, aerospace, renewable energy, and electric vehicle manufacturing. With a median age of 19, Africa's youth population makes up over 77% of the continent's total, marking it the world's youngest and fastest growing demographic group with significant implications for future economic and social development. This abundant resource wealth has not only triggered the re-emergence of global powers such as the USA, China, and Russia, but has also drawn emerging powers from Europe, Asia, and the Middle East into African affairs. Many scholars and analysts describe this as the new scramble for Africa. And guess what? Whoever is successful in retaining influence in Africa will be the leader of the fourth revolution. The world power knows this, and that is why every one of them, including Trump, who detest Africa, is trying to maintain control. The only difference is that each of them have their approach. And from what we can see, China's approach seems to be winning. But the question is, as these countries are trying to maintain influence in Africa, what can Africa do to ensure that it stands to be a big winner? As you know, the first scramble was done without the permission of Africa, and it destabilized the continent, creating what is called the colonial era. So, will Africa just watch quietly as the new scramble begins? The fact is that Africa cannot afford to sit back and watch as foreign countries fight over it. Africa can emerge as a major winner in the new scramble by negotiating fairer trade agreements that emphasize value addition and local production. By shifting from merely exporting raw materials to processing them domestically, African countries can capture more of the value chain, create jobs, and reduce dependency on external markets. This shift requires strategic partnerships that prioritize technology transfer and skill development, helping to lay the foundation for diversified economies and sustainable growth. African countries can bolster the African Union to enhance its capacity in peacekeeping, conflict resolution, and humanitarian aid, thereby reducing reliance on external powers that often have exploitative interests. With better funding and coordination, the AU could play a significant role in addressing regional conflicts and humanitarian crises, allowing African-led solutions to take precedence over foreign intervention. Strengthening the AU's peace-building initiatives would help build regional stability, empowering African nations to set their agendas and mitigate external influence in their internal affairs. To maximize its bargaining power, Africa can strengthen regional alliances like the African Union and the African Continental Free Trade Area. Unified regional approaches help African nations negotiate better terms and resist exploitative arrangements, ensuring that foreign investments contribute to long-term development rather than creating dependency. Strong regional cooperation can also enhance political stability, making Africa a more attractive and secure destination for sustainable investments. What are your thoughts? Let us know in the comments section below. Don't forget to like this video, drop a comment, and subscribe to our channel.